When we first discussed, I asked, portable power generator. Well, I'm looking forward to your presentation. I want a home brew one. And I've been thinking like what battery and charge controller. You said, nah, you don't want to do that. Just there's too many good options. So I am really interested in your presentation to hear what good options are available. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Diana.
Okay, well, thank you. Good to be here, and good evening to everyone, wherever you might be. This solar generator talk, just as a little bit of background before I start my slides, the initial version of this was created for LA County Disaster Communications Service, and I gave that in August of last year. And I never had any idea that this product category was going to explode the way it has, and explode in a positive way. And also that pricing dynamics and other features were going to take off in so many unusual directions. So I started following this category, and the presentation you're going to see tonight is the 7th version. And what you see tonight bears very little resemblance to the original one given to LA County DCS. And they sort of regard that as their property. Okay, but anyway, I think I hope you find this interesting because I've gone all in on these once you understand the advantages of it. Okay, so as a former newscaster or sportscaster in New York City, Warner Wolf used to say, let's go to the videotape. And here we go. This presentation is talking about portable solar generators. By portable, we're referring to ones that are not suited for powering your whole house. These are ones you can take about with you, but most importantly, even at your house, these are the devices that will power your most critical devices like your cell phones, your tablets, your computers. It's not going to power a hairdryer, not going to power your air conditioner. Now, there are more expensive solar generators out there. We're not going to cover those. Those get into very high dollar value territory. You can get a solar generator system for your house, but you're looking at about $25,000 to $35,000. What we're talking about here are generally units under $1,500 and ones that you can easily take with you no matter where you are. What we're going to talk about is what is a solar generator. Secondly, why you might want to get one, and you'll see there are more reasons than you might think. Third, we're going to talk about the unusual market and industry characteristics of this business segment. Then, number 4, we're going to talk about how you choose a solar generator. Your choice of lithium battery. There are multiple types of lithium batteries. Not all are created the same. Then we'll talk about your portable power strategy, which will determine what size unit you may want to get or get multiple units. And then we'll talk about how you differentiate some of the different brands and models. And then 5th, we'll talk briefly about solar panels, what might work best for you depending on your strategy. And lastly, we'll talk about is building a do-it-yourself solar generator worth it? Okay, I'm going to answer that right now, even though we'll get into the detail later. The answer is don't even bother building your own. There's no way on earth that you will enjoy the economics that the builders of these products are now. Save your DIY expertise or time for building something more significant, like a magnetic loop HF antenna, of which there are very few models available. But this is one category where it's not worth it. And secondly, someone else has gone to the trouble of engineering this pretty well. And with lithium batteries and your family around, you probably want something that has a little more safety to it than your home brew. So what is a solar generator? It's basically solar panels, photovoltaic panels, with some kind of battery storage device that can give you both AC and DC power outputs. So what these boxes do is they integrate several key components. There's a maximum power point tracking solar charger, which optimizes the solar energy being picked up by your cells that reflect whether there's some of your cells are in the shade or whatever. You have a large lithium battery, and we'll get into later. There are several types of those. But most importantly, there's a battery management system in there. The battery management system is what turns on fans and keeps these batteries cool to prevent them from exploding or worse or whatever. thankfully, these are getting very, very safe. There's also a DC to AC inverter set of outlets and a number of AC and DC power distribution outlets. So what you see here are just two typical devices. At the left here is a Jackery brand, and then here is Goal Zero. All of these and all the others on the market have three different ways in which you can charge it. Number one is solar panels, but you can also charge it from AC mains power. They all come with a pretty high power AC power charging transformer, and you can also charge it from your vehicle in the 12-volt lighter socket, which is the longest way. So anyway, three ways to power all these, and the power is stored in here, and it's like a big stored power source in your house. Now, the key thing is inside this battery management system, and I don't know whether this is a real photo or a stylized thing. The problem is you never see real photos of the insides of these devices. That's the proprietary knowledge these firms have. But basically, you got a lot of battery cells at the bottom, and then above that, a sophisticated charging and battery management system that turns on the fans and makes sure everything is optimized to get the most out of your power cells, and then distribute the power accordingly, and then manage it. As you can see, there's a little screen here, and these screens on all these units tell you how many watts are coming in, how many watts are going out, and how many watts you're consuming right now. So this is a cutaway of an EcoFlow Delta 2 solar generator, which has lithium iron phosphate batteries cells in it. Okay, so let's just take a quick tour here. I'm using this example of a Jackery Explorer 1000 just as an example of what a typical device has. They all have some kind of a solar input section. Here, the Jackery takes solar input via an Anderson power pole connector, and this is the input for the AC charging, just using the AC mains in your house. And then you see the display here. It shows how many watts are coming in, how many watts are going out, the battery capacity. Then you have a DC power outlet section. There's a 12-volt, 10-amp car lighter adapter socket, a USB one, USB-C, and then two of those, and then two USB-A type sockets. And then down here, you see there are AC outlets, which are inverter outlets, and not all of these devices are quite the same in some very important respects in terms of labeling or, for that matter, their electrical outlet. There are devices out there that will say a pure sine wave, very pure energy coming out of here. That's part of the electronics that's inside here. But every one of these models has some kind of issue that hampers its readability. For example, on this unit, the maximum input wattage in the upper left is not stated. On the other hand, my Bluetti model says maximum input 200 watts. So, it's not shown here. Likewise, down below in the USB-C, the output is unlabeled. Is it a 45 watt, a 60 watt, or 100 watt? My unit I bought is labeled 100 watts USB-C power delivery. That's exactly what you need for charging a MacBook or a recent model Dell or HP type notebook. Okay, and then you can see here where it has in the AC inverter section, says 1000 watts. Well, where this thing falls down is that it should say 1000 watts total. It's not 1000 watts per outlet. So here's the problem. You have other family members in your home. You may have something plugged into one of these, and then someone else comes along and wants to plug in another device, and they don't realize the 1000 watts is total. So anyway, there are some precautions you need to be aware of. Now here's the unit I bought, and these guys pulled the Apple computer printing strategy. Apple prints all their brochures with light gray type on bright white paper. You can barely read the type. These guys did almost the same. They have low contrast gray type on dark gray background. Doesn't do you very good in a dim background. But here you can see they did label the input maximum 200 watts. The USB output is labeled at 100 watts, and they labeled the DC output for the USB-A 5 volt 3 amps. And this one also has DC barrel connectors, which by their design is limited to 10 amps anyway. And then some wall wart supplies on this one may not fit. There's a frame that comes out, and unfortunately, some longer wall warts are going to interfere with that frame, so your two prongs are not going to go in. So every one of these things on the market has some kind of Achilles heel or weakness. As I mentioned earlier, it's very important to understand that on the AC side, when you see the value here, this is the total. And it may say 1,000 watts, maybe 1,200 watts, but meanwhile, you may have a spouse who wants to plug in an 1,800 watt hair dryer. That's a no-go. So large microwaves are generally not going to work on these smaller portable devices, but they do accommodate a lot of stuff. Okay, so we talked briefly, what is a solar generator? Now, why should you buy one of these? Okay, I asked myself that initially, and now I own 3 of them. So I guess I'm somewhat of a sold candidate on it. Okay, let's clear the air about carbon fuel generators in the Golden State. As you may know, there's been legislation that's starting in January next year. Almost all new gasoline-fueled small engine devices will be banned for sale. You can still use existing ones. This is mostly aimed at garden equipment like leaf blowers, weed whackers, and all the like. The California Air Resources Board calculated that one leaf blower, typical gasoline-powered leaf blower, emits as much pollution in 1 hour as a Toyota Camry driven from Los Angeles to Denver. And I'm sure when your gardeners come, if you have landscapers, we have to close the windows when these guys are out there with their blowers and weed whackers. The fumes are just terrible. Anyway, they'll be going electric mostly pretty soon. Okay, now here's the thing that affects ham radio. Starting January 2028, new gasoline-powered generators cannot be sold in California. Of course, you can still sell them now, but they have to be CARB approved. However, there are 2 giant loopholes starting in 2028 too. First of all, even though gasoline-powered generators cannot be sold, new diesel and propane ones can be. And existing gasoline generators can still be used, and you can even resell it to somebody else. So they're not going to go away right away. Loophole number 2 is you can drive to Nevada or Arizona and buy a gasoline-powered generator there and drive it back. These devices will still be available for sale in 49 other states, which is also a reason why the generator companies have not moved much into portable solar generators. They want to preserve their business that still is going on in the other 49 states and worldwide. For disaster communicators and hams, we can use these for powering a lot of non-radio devices. And I'll tell you why they can't be used very well for radio devices. The reason you'd want to get these is, first of all, there are no carbon fuels you need to buy. It's very safe to store and use. No carbon monoxide. It's just so blissful not to have a generator droning in the background. These are much easier to maintain than fuel generators. You don't have to change the oil. You don't have to put Stabiel in there to maintain the gasoline. They're a lot lighter and more portable generally than a fuel generator, no moving parts. And you have a lot of flexibility for many, many uses here. It's mostly, though, as I mentioned earlier, for charging your essential electronics, not your whole house. Now, these have been used by a number of people for powering home medical devices. If you have a CPAP machine or some other device that is critical to keep on, they are not quite so great for all radio transceivers. They're okay for VHF, UHF, and that's because the DC barrel connectors in here are rated at 10 amps. They're not going to cut it for HF on 100 watts. What's missing from all of these devices are Anderson power pole connectors that could take the full load for, say, 100 watts of HF application. So once you have one of these devices, you're going to find a lot of things that will justify your purchase. The most obvious, of course, is what happens when you have a power outage. Okay, that we all get that. The other thing is when you are about to have a potential power outage, i.e. the flex alert, when the California Independent System Operator says, okay, between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. today, we need everyone to cut back 5% on your power. Okay, take out this box and you can plug in some devices and you're doing your civic duty. But a bigger use I'm finding is that in a lot of older homes, you don't have enough AC outlets for things. The place I'm in now is my mother's home. She turned 98 last week, not doing all that well, but I've been here since the pandemic started, even though I have my own home, which is more of a warehouse for many of my toys. But in this house, no one ever expected bedrooms to be used as a home office with multiple monitors, computers, laser printers, and all that. And so I use my solar generators with their stored energy to provide additional outlets on, say, warm days when I want to have a fan going here and I don't want to overtax the system. So just another thing to think about. And of course, in older homes, the outlets are never where you really wanted them to be. So keep that in mind. Okay, there are other uses. Camping, recreational vehicle use. This was one of the big drivers of this category in the first place when it started in 2007. For public service events, it's great as well. I took one of my solar generators to the Los Angeles Marathon on March 19th, and we used it for powering our lights, being able to recharge our devices, iPads, and whatever. And we found we also became the most popular kids on the block. After the Boston Marathon bombing, security got ramped up dramatically at the LA Marathon and the finish line area. So there were all these security guards everywhere. And several of them peered in our area and they noticed we had a solar generator. And they said, hey, could we recharge our cell phones on your device there? And I had an iPhone charging cable. And so we accommodated a number of guards. You'll become a popular person. Number 5, in your own backyard. If you have a party or some other gathering, you can use this for powering lights or sound or whatever without having extension cords going all over the place. Not all homes are equipped with outdoor AC outlets. There's more to it. I'm actively involved with photography and video stuff as well, not commercially, but just for myself. And I have a bunch of LED lights on stands. Well, I can power those outdoors as well without resorting to extension cords. You can also recharge all kinds of batteries of whatever type you have. And then, most importantly also, many of these models function as a UPS, uninterruptible power supply. And you got to read the fine print for each model to see whether it's always in inverter mode, meaning you're being powered off the battery, or is there a switchover? And some of them will say, a UPS with 20 millisecond switchover. So that means if you have a desktop computer hooked up, you might lose some data, but for the fan or other devices, it doesn't care. A lot of uses here beyond just power outages. So let's talk about the market and industry for these devices. This is a Wild West market right now. It is really crazy, and you'll see why in a minute. This market is in the classic rapid growth phase. Almost all these brands are unknowns. There are no household names yet that you might think of. There's no Honda in here, Briggs & Stratton, or other familiar generator brands. Many of you probably don't even recognize these brands, but these are only about half of the leading brands today. It's an absolute free-for-all. Just so you know, this category got started with Goal Zero here in 2007. In my opinion, and this is only an opinion, they might have been a strategic mistake in creating a pricing umbrella. They priced them pretty high. I remember seeing these in Costco back then. And I thought, wow, these are still pretty expensive. But the high price attracted more competition. As they say in economics, any product category with an above market rate of return tends to attract competition. It did. 2 years later, Bouge RV, which was already selling refrigerators for to be used in your RV or camper, off of your car battery, they got into this. GrowWatt came out in 2010, and Jackery came out in 2012, Bluetti in 2013. Green Power is one of the more recent arrivals in 2020. I think Renogy came about in 2014. The question is, the only reason I say this is, most of these companies are pretty young. The question is, how many are going to be around in 10 years? In most industries, when you have a situation like this, industry consolidation inevitably sets in. And the founders of these companies are going to want to sell out, cash out, and somebody among here is going to get bigger and bigger over time. So anyway, there are more brands than you see here. The only brand that could be considered a household name at the bottom here is Generac. Generac makes generators, but somebody makes one private label solar generator for them. I suspect if any household name is going to come up soon, it would probably be one of the power tool companies like DeWalt or Milwaukee. They would have a great reason to have these, not only for charging batteries, but for all the other electronic devices that contractors might take onto a job site. And not every job site has electricity, or you could even use a generator there. Okay, I have to give the disclaimer. All brand names and logos are registered trademarks of their respective owners. I know this meeting's being recorded, so it's important to have that statement. This market is as I mentioned, is in a very rapid growth phase, and there are no household names yet. The thing is, this is really a global market, but it doesn't have a global consumer. The reasons are varied. Number one is not every consumer in the world has room for something like this. It turns out quite a few people live in apartments, condos, or high rises. In the US, from what I could ascertain, about 20% of US households live in apartments, condos, high rises, or whatever, whereas in Western Europe, it's 50%. When I was doing this research, I was astounded, for example, to learn that in Germany, 56% of all households live in apartments. And in Poland, which is a little more of an agrarian economy, it's 43%, and Greece is like 60%. The reasons we all know. You know, the US, through various financial and tax policies, fostered a notion of single-family home ownership, coupled with suburban sprawl that was fueled by cheaper gasoline and energy than Europe and other parts of the world had because of all their excise taxes on fuel and whatever. So the US really became, you know, a nation of homeowners, and we have backyards or other space that lets us set out solar panels or whatever. So not everybody has room for solar panels to charge their solar generator. Even some people who do have the room aren't suitable for this. There are people who live in very high latitudes like Norway, Sweden, northern Canada, Alaska. You really only have good sunlight for about 3 or 4 months of the year. Even if you're in a place like LA, where we have a lot of sunlight, many of us or some of us live in a canyon. You may only have good sunlight in your backyard for 5 or 6 hours a day. Other people in our cities have obstructions nearby. You may live next to an apartment building, or your neighbor built a McMansion that blocks half the sun coming in your backyard. So not every consumer is suitable for this. The generator costs are still a little high for some people, but they are coming down. We'll talk about that. In the third world countries, these would be just wonderful in very poor areas. Unfortunately, the cost of a solar generator and panels would be about 1 year's income or even more in impoverished areas. But here's the key point. This market's growing by 2 different estimates I saw, 11 to 17% annually between now and 2027. But despite that high growth, it hasn't attracted household names right now. So recently, since I did this talk in August 2022, more brands are switching now to lithium iron phosphate batteries in their newer models, both for reasons of cost and safety. Lithium iron phosphate batteries, as many of you know, is what Bioenno batteries have been promoting. What's happening now is there are extensive price wars and discounting going on. Go on to Amazon, look at these different products, and you'll see, click here for $300 off, click here for $100 off. It's really crazy. All of these guys are duking it out for market share, because if you don't grow, you're not going to be a survivor when the market consolidates. Even more confusing, some brands with new models are changing the panel connector types. And within brands, you'll have multiple connectors like Anderson power poles in some models, and then a DC barrel connector in others. New brands are arriving regularly. And unfortunately, some of these brands have become a victim of their own success. When you go on Amazon and you read the reviews, you'll see complaints about people being unable to reach customer support. But I have to say that in reading through the comments, it appears some of those people who are upset are not ham operators. They don't understand electricity. So take it for what it is. There is no solar industry standard for the solar generator market. It's a wild market. And even when you thought Anderson power poles were a standard, they're not. Take a look on the left. On Jackery, their units have the ground, the black ground on the right side. Okay, nothing wrong with that. Bouge RV turns it vertically with the ground on the left. And Rock Pals, another brand, they stack the power poles vertically. So if you get a solar panel with an Anderson connector on it coming out, you'd sure hope that the shells were not glued together, because if you have different brands of generators, you're going to have to take the shells apart and reorient them. And here we all thought Anderson power poles were a standard. Okay, let's talk now about choosing a solar generator. Your most important decision right now is what type of lithium battery do you want? And then we'll talk about your strategy for portable power and looking at different models. This is maybe the most important chart you may see here. This is comparing 5 different types of lithium batteries. We're going to get into each of these in a minute. But the most important thing to look at is the energy density. This is how many watt hours are in a liter of space, if you will. So let's take a look at all 5 and we'll go through it real quickly. The first type on the left here, lithium titanium oxide. These are batteries with 177 watt hours per liter of space. They have 3,000 to 7,000 charge cycles, and you find these used in solar street lighting, UPS power systems, the kind of things that always have to be recharged every night, or if you will. Not a lot of power per unit. What the solar generator segment is increasingly going to is the bioenno type battery, lithium iron phosphate. Here you can see that the watt hours per liter is almost double that of lithium titanium oxide batteries. Number of charge cycles, about 2,000 to 4,000. And it's good for all kinds of applications that need some high current and endurance over the long run. The next type is lithium manganese oxide, a little bit higher watt hours per liter, but you can see the charge cycles are way down. What's going on here? Well, power tools are the biggest market for these. And this is probably the salvation for the power tool companies. If you're a contractor, you're going to have power drill, power saw, whatever, cordless ones. That's all the rage now. You're going to be charging that battery every day. And chances are, after 2 years of heavy use, you're going to have to buy another battery. So these batteries wear out. They just don't have the charge cycles, but they provide more power than lithium iron phosphate, and then they're used in power tools, some medical devices. Now, the most used battery is a lithium cobalt oxide. And here you have a whopping 560 watt hours per liter, which is substantial, almost 80% higher than lithium iron phosphate. But notice the number of charge cycles is about a fourth. So we all know that from our cell phone, right? Because what are the biggest markets for these batteries? All the small portable electronic devices. And when a product designer wants to get as much power as they can into a compact space, this is what they often turn to. Now, look on the far right here, lithium nickel manganese oxide batteries. These have a little bit higher watt hours per liter than the cobalt oxide, but you get double the number of charge cycles. Where are these used? They're mostly Teslas have them, e-bikes, e-scooters. So it now begs the question, where have we seen most of the fires in lithium batteries? Well, guess what? It's in these areas: e-bikes, e-scooters, electric vehicles, cell phones, laptops. That's why lithium iron phosphate batteries are a safer choice. Basically, to sum up what the situation is, you're putting less power in the same amount of space. Here you're putting almost double the amount of power in the same space. Whenever you charge or discharge a battery, it generates heat. And the lithium iron phosphate battery generally won't catch fire. Everything in the world will catch fire at some temperature. In the case of the lithium iron phosphate, these batteries will have what's called thermal runaway, typically at about 450 to 500 degrees Fahrenheit, whereas the lithium nickel manganese cobalt oxide batteries have a thermal runaway at about 310 degrees. The market is moving back this way for another reason. Look at this, cobalt. Cobalt last year or up until early last year, cobalt was priced at about $31,000 a ton. Early last year, and for the first half of last year, cobalt was $85,000 a ton. That's what these metals are what are keeping up the cost of Teslas, the prices of Teslas and other expensive electric vehicles. There is so much pressure right now for car makers to get electric vehicles more reasonably priced to meet these sales targets that are going to be imposed, that the market's moving down to the lithium iron phosphate batteries in cars. But because they have less watt hours per liter, they're going to have less range than, say, the lithium, nickel, manganese, cobalt oxide batteries. But this is where the market's going long term. Obviously, to get the same amount of power as up here, you have to have more batteries in the car, which means more weight. Okay, now what should you think about in choosing a solar generator? First question is, do you want lithium iron phosphate or a lithium ion? I opted for lithium iron phosphate. I'm familiar with bioenno batteries, and even though they're a little heavier than regular lithium ion batteries, I value the safety feature. You have to also ask yourself, how many watt hours do you need? And what price do you want to pay? How much do you want to carry? Some of these devices, especially the ones that provide more watt hours, are almost as heavy as a Honda EU 2000 generator. They can be 45 to 70 pounds. You also have to ask, what's your use strategy? Are you better off with two smaller units or one large one? I know a number of people who thought, oh, let's just get one large one, like with about 1,800 watt hours capacity. I opted instead to buy three mid-sized units of about 716 watt hours each, giving me a total of 2,100 altogether. And the reason for that is I wanted to have a distributed power strategy, if you will. We had here in December a 17-hour Edison outage. And so I put one of these units in the room where my mom normally hangs out, watching TV and reading. So we had power for her to watch over-the-air television and lamps to come on so she could do reading. And things worked out fine. There are some smaller devices as well. I had another device, a solar generator in my room, and we had another one in the kitchen. So the question is, do you want to have one big unit and then run cords all over your house, or do you want to have more distributed power? And of course, if you have distributed power, if one unit goes out, you still have two left. Okay, you also need to look at what are the maximum wattages you need in your outputs. As I mentioned earlier, USB-C power delivery, I need 100 watts. Some people may be satisfied with just 40 or so. And then you have to ask, how will it mostly be charged, via AC or solar panels? Some of the complaints you'll read about in reviews on these products say, oh, the charger is so noisy. Well, I'm sorry, when you're trying to deliver 200 watts of power at a high rate, there will be a fan inside that little power supply brick, and it will go. As I mentioned, this is looking at portable generators, not whole house units. We're looking at under $1,600, mostly under 30 pounds, built-in solar charge controller with inverter and available for purchase. So what I did when I first started doing this in August 2022 was I pulled out a bunch of brands and models and tried to calculate what is the cost per watt hour. And that's the key metric I would suggest you do. Take the price and divide it by the number of watt hours. So here there's a Jackery 240 watt hour unit selling then for $220, and it gave 92 cents per watt hour. And you can see how different models stack up. Look at Goal Zero, the innovator in this category. They had very high costs back then. Now, to give you an idea of how things have changed since August, see this Jackery 1002 watt hour unit for $10.99. Today on Amazon, it is available for $8.99. So it's gone down below the $1 mark per watt hour. And I did it for some other brands, and I ended up settling then on a Bluetti because they had a lower price. But the lower price was also because they used lithium iron phosphate batteries. And it turns out that iron and phosphates are a lot cheaper than cobalt and manganese. So that's another reason why car makers are gravitating towards lithium iron phosphate. Now, breaking news. I did not go back to every one of these brands because some of the models are not found anymore, but with a representative sample, the current average price per watt hour is now down to 85 cents per watt hour versus $1.03 in August last year. This is a dynamic product category with new people coming in the market and prices changing all the time. So that's the key point I want to get across to you. Things are in the right direction. Okay, I also looked at these by their weight, and you want to see how many watt hours do you get per pound. Some of these units give you a lot of watt hours per pound, some give less. And the reason the Bluettis were less was because they had the lower energy density of the lithium iron phosphate batteries, whereas the other brands were standard lithium ion brands. Okay, so anyway, for much of the second half last year, this unit from Bluetti had the lowest cost per watt hour of about 79 cents, and they claim 2,500 plus life cycles. To put that into perspective, they say you can plug these in every day of the year, and they'll last for at least 9 to 10 years for the most part. Anyway, this had everything I needed, and I was happy. Now, currently, the lowest cost I found is a brand most of us have never heard of, FF Power, 2,000 watt hours for $1,000. That's 50 cents a watt hour. This is what's happening in this market. It's just great. It's like semiconductors. Moore's law, and performance improves and the cost comes down. So now let's talk briefly about solar panels and what's best for you. We're almost done. There are a few complications here with the solar panels. It turns out some brands will say we do not warrant our device with not our panels. Bluetti, for example, says they won't be responsible for any damage to the solar generator if you use panels other than Bluetti. All the makers, for the most part, not all, but many, have these nice folding panels. They're very portable. You can see they have handles on the sides. They're lighter than what you would put on the roof of your house. But the good news is when you buy the manufacturer's brand, you know that all the connectors and the wiring polarity will be correct. It'll also match your power station's colors and design if that's important to you. The key problem here is they tend to have a kickstand in back that may have somewhat limited tilt angles as you're trying to chase the sun during the course of a day. Now, this Jackery 100 watt unit over here, you can get that on Amazon today for $269. However, I bought a sort of a clone from an outfit called Solar Popo on Amazon for $159 versus $269 for Jackery. All the makers have really overpriced their own brand, but there are other units available should you want it. Now, here's one of the rub. When you have a third-party portable panel or a heavy metal frame unit, they may cost less, but you got to do a little bit of homework here. You have to make sure that the maximum panel wattage does not exceed what your power station requires. For example, my Bluetti device has 200 watts maximum in, but yet there are 400 watt solar panels, and that would not be good. You also have to check if you get a third-party solar panel, make sure the cable polarity is correct for what you need. Sometimes red and black don't always mean plus and minus as you might think, or male and female. It's bizarre. There are no standards, as I mentioned in this. Moreover, the plug you use varies. Some solar generators take an 8-millimeter plug, DC plug like this. Others take a 5.5-millimeter one. Some take a 2.5-millimeter one. Others take an Anderson power pole. And the EcoFlow brand is heavily fixated on an XT60, which is basically a two-prong electrical plug. So anyway, that's what goes on coming out of these solar panels. Now, for the non-portable type metal frame panels, they usually use what's called an MC4 plug, and you will need an adapter for those usually to get into your device. This is the MC4 connector. This is what you find on rooftop solar and outdoor solar installations because it's a weather-resistant connector, but you will need an adapter cable to take it from a device like this. And yes, I have bought two 100-watt solar panels in aluminum frames. They're heavier, not quite so easy to carry, but they have the MC4 connectors, and you just have to buy an adapter to get into your type of solar generator. Okay, we're almost done. So, as I said at the outset, asking the question rhetorically, is it worth building your own solar generator? The answer is, I do know some hams who were upset with the high cost of these devices, and they thought, oh, it might be much better to design and build their own. Well, once they started sourcing all the parts, they realized, it's not going to work that way. The firms that make these solar generators can buy the components for up to 70% less than you. So how can that be? Well, here's an example from Newark Electronics, which is a well-known electronics distributor. And this is for a particular Schottky diode, which is commonly used in inverters. So this is from Newark's website, by the way. I didn't make this up. If you want to buy just one, the price is 24.6 cents each. Okay. You want to buy 10 or more, the price for all of them from the first on is 20.8 cents. You want to buy 50 or more, the price drops to 9 cents. I mean, those of you who have been around electronics probably know or have seen this before. But look what happens at the bottom. If you want to buy 1,000 or more, the price is 4.1 cents each. You're probably asking, how can they get away with this? How can they do this? Okay, well, this gets back to Economics 101, the familiar class in college called microeconomics. You need to do, in a highly competitive market, you should base your pricing on your marginal cost, not your average cost. The marginal cost is the price or cost of making or selling the next unit of production. As professors like to gloat, any firm that prices on the basis of their average cost will quickly go out of business. But also, this is one of the few instances where firms are able to engage in price discrimination under the Robinson-Patman Act, which is a federal law that requires the same prices and terms to everyone in your market area. The only exceptions are based on distribution costs or freight or things like that. So anyway, this is why the makers of these devices, and by the way, most of these makers are in China or some other Asian location. I can tell you, they're going to buy the parts for a lot less than you can get them. If you want to custom build one, yeah, you can probably do it for $1,500, but you also have to engineer the battery management system to keep this thing safe. And if you want to use it around your family, you really have an obligation to make sure you do your engineering well and know what you're doing. Here's a quality lithium iron phosphate battery with a 720 watt-hour capacity. We're all familiar with Bioenno. So for $570, you can buy this. Or for $549, you can buy essentially the same capacity lithium iron phosphate battery, all built with outlets, battery management system, computerized power monitoring for $20 or so less. So you decide what's more important to you. I think we're at the end of the road here. I hope you've now become a little more familiar with solar generators for your non-radio devices. But as I said, you can use these for VHF, UHF radios for the most part. Keep in mind the DC barrel connectors only give 10 amps out. And at this time, there are still no Anderson power poles for powering radio gear coming out of these. But the good news is solar generally works in our area. So tap it if you need to. And thank you very much for listening.